always think, what is my dog looking at and how can I have my dog look at me? What is my dog gravitating towards and how can I have my dog gravitate towards me? That's essentially what we're doing with training, is we're just making what in your dog's world, these otherwise small things that your dog turns into a big deal. We're making these big deal things small, like they should be, where your dog doesn't give a crap. You want your dog to not care about stuff. So in order to have your dog not care about stuff, he needs to care about you. The only way that's going to happen is if you care about him. How are you going to do that? You're going to learn about him. You're going to apply. You're going to grow yourself, because without growing yourself, you cannot grow your dog. What is up, champion puppy owners? Do you really want a streamlined ownership experience? Do you really want a socialized dog with manners, responsiveness, and general life skills? Great, you're in the right place. This podcast is for accountable puppy owners who want to better know and grow their dogs. Time to put on your big girl panties, buckle up, and ride with me. Pat Quinn, the founder and creator of the Champion Puppy Training System. Let's go. Hey there, my Champion Puppy Training owners. Welcome to or welcome back. What we're going to talk about today is why people, hopefully not you, get dependent on training with food. Whether it's treats or food, we're going to kind of go through that today. But what can happen is people can't graduate off of showing that reward. And that's a bad spot to be at if you're trying to develop your puppy. Without further ado, number one, they start and or continue sloppy. During my initial session, I first start by giving a macro level view as to what we're going to accomplish over the next couple weeks and lay out, again, the week over week goals. Then I go over the dog's daily regimen. And then from there, I immediately start breaking down what we're going to do when we do hands-on training. And when I do that, I kind of get bogged down in the three modalities of communication. What the three modalities of communication are in my system are verbal, body language, and leash. The reason why I spend so much time doing that, and sometimes my clients start to look at me when I'm going over the three modalities of communication, and they're kind of like, all right, this guy's intense. Is this really necessary? And I always explain to them kind of once I start to see that look or maybe in advance, the reason why we're actually doing this is because it's essential. If you don't know what you're doing, like literally you will not know what you're doing if when your puppy does something and you go to respond, you're just going to be shooting from the hip. So it's very important that you not only read your puppy correctly, and that's a whole different side of the leash, but you must respond in a well-timed way that makes sense. And using verbal, leash, and body language to play off each other is where that synergy happens. So if your general handling skills, in a nutshell, aren't where they need to be, you're going to then be prone to compensate with sloppy rewarding, as the two normally go hand in hand. So that's number one. You're not communicating tightly and effectively. Number two, your hands are basically living in your pocket, or you constantly have food in your hands that your dog is gravitating towards. So if your hands are always in your pocket, and we're going to talk about the better use of your hands when we get to step number 9, or if you're constantly having the food dangling in front of your dog's face, you're going to become dependent on it. So just keep that in mind on the front end. I'm going to save for a different podcast the actual rewarding process, like how you can have it make sense for your dog that, boom, that right there is what's getting you hooked up, and the reward is coming in a way that isn't chintzy, like the rollout is appropriate. So we'll talk about that during a separate podcast. There's another reason why you should subscribe to this podcast. Number 3, you start with high value treats. You go into the big box store, they say, oh, I heard these things are the bee's knees for training, and then you throw it in your cart and you start training with it. Or that's what you do. That's what you do when you have a puppy is you buy treats and you just start teaching Paul. You're going through the motions. And when you go through the motions in life, you get generic results. You get this day and age results. And a lot of dogs in this day and age, they got some issues. And that's not going to be your dog. Not on my watch anyway. So don't go right in for training with high value treats. I want you to get your dog on a food motivation schedule where you cut out treats, you cut out human food, you cut out wet food unless there's a medical reason for it. And that's a conversation that if you're one of my clients in my system, we would have before you actually even sign up as to like what the workaround is for that. And only give your dog access to its daily kibble. And you're going to do that in a way where you put the food bowl down, and if it doesn't eat immediately, it goes up, and then you calibrate how much food you're actually putting in the food bowl. So if your dog's eating 70 pieces out of the 100 you put in, you're going to stop putting 100 in until your dog shows that it wants to consume those 100 pieces of kibble immediately. Now all of a sudden, we're starting inside where it's nice and quiet with a low value reward, right? Which is actually going to be a pretty high value reward once you bring your dog through that food motivation regimen. It doesn't make sense to pair like treats right off the bat for just doing the basics. I would rather keep those treats in reserve for maybe if you're aspiring to do off-leash work with your dog and you take those 3 modalities of communication as far as you can. You take your dog's conditioning, that muscle memory, and everything as far as you can. You scale it up in baby steps. Then from there, when you can't do anything else that you can think of, you've exhausted all your options and your dog is almost there, but it still just needs a little bit more motivation, well, then all of a sudden you can have treats to fall back on at the tail end of your training spectrum. For me, I don't train with treats at all. It's kind of like once you work certain things out of your life, like whether it be like toxic people or like bad habits, you just like never go back there. And I just haven't, quite frankly, had the need to really train with treats with dogs in my training system. It's just not necessary because we make such good use of everything else that the food becomes secondary if done correctly. Anyway, that's number 3. So train with food, your dog's daily kibble, and then train with treats way down the line. And if you do want to give your dog treats, like that is if you're not in that boot camp, like focused mode for those 4 weeks, like in my actual system, I just give my dogs like human food. Like if we're going to throw out the lunch meat or if like, you know, our clients give us treats because we have a lot of local clients who are always hooking me, my family, our dogs up with stuff. So I don't just want to like throw them in the trash and you know, I don't care if my dogs eat, you know, human food or treats now that they're older and well trained, but I just give it to them in their food bowl. I make sure that I don't tie the relationship of them getting the hookup with the human food with like certain activities. Like I don't want every time I go to make my daughters lunch in the morning that when they hear that lunch meat, boom, they come running over. That's what you want to avoid. So I would rather just have you kind of sneak in those hookups for treats versus actually tying like human food or treats in with your training. I'd rather keep it clean, keep it pure. Anyway, 4th reason why most people get stuck on training with food or relying on training with treats and their dog is not responsive unless they're showing them the goods is because they have no exit strategy. As a business owner, as soon as I got done building my actual facility, like I hand built the kennels and everything for my first facility, our next thing was to hire people who could, you know, think and be grown and come up with systems for them to operate free of our guidance. And that was our intention right from the door, because if not, we would be those business owners who were glued to their business. And especially in the canine services industry where in a split second, catastrophe can happen around every corner of interactions all day long, the stakes are high. So with that in mind, we don't take the weaning off of our ownership model lightly, but we do it very strategically. And I want you to do the same with the exit strategy for your puppy training. And that's why I spend time going over the 3 modalities of communication and going over some of the concepts that I'm going to talk about here in a couple minutes. Because if you don't know all those moving parts, then you're not going to be able to scale. You're just not. So having an exit strategy and always thinking, what can I do less but get the same or a better response from my puppy? Like, what is it that I'm doing that might be able to be tweaked and worked out of? Or how can I work it from a different angle? Which we're going to talk a little bit more in future podcasts, and more importantly on videos and webinars. If you're one of my clients, then we'll go over a lot more of that actual like exit strategy stuff as we up your game, and you just get super casual with throwing out commands and getting a higher level of response, even though you're even more casual about it and you're going through less. You're projecting less information onto your dog. You're projecting less guidance, or you're having to give less guidance, but yet you're getting more. So that's what I mean when I talk about like the exit strategy. How can I wean off of not just the food, but my guidance to that dog? And that's why I break down those 3 modalities of communication. And then from there, within each modality, leash, verbal, and body language, respectively, we go over into a little bit more detail how we use all those. So knowing those are important, because if you don't know what you're communicating, or if you don't know how to read your dog, you can't have an exit strategy. So with that in mind, though, once you understand those, then it's a matter of scaling back so you can scale your dog up. Number 5, lack of use or the lack of understanding as to how to use the leash. So that kind of fits in with what I was just talking about in regards to the modalities of communication, the leash being one of them. I teach my clients to move in baby steps. And what the leash will allow you to do is to scale above and beyond where your dog is currently at in his or her abilities. Imagine getting underneath a bench and there's 150 pounds on it, right? And you can only bench a $120. Having a spotter there is going to allow you to actually do a rep with some good form and not crush your sternum with the bar. Not have you look like a fool in the gym because you need someone to rush over and lift the weights up, for you, or you let the weights go crashing down. Having a leash will allow you to spot your dog. Now, how eloquently you use the leash is based upon 1, your condition of your dog, and 2, your handling skills and that ramp up process. But for sake of brevity, know that the leash in my system, I would rather be a little bit dependent on the leash at first and have to use that a little bit more frequently than to be dependent on food. Because you're going to be dependent on something at first because the comprehension isn't there. So do you want to be dependent on bribery, which is hard to wean off of, or do you want to use a tool that has a nice bridge to verbal and body language? So that leash is a bridge, right? Where it's a cleaner weaning off process of the leash versus the food in my experience. Now, don't get me wrong. We wean off of food, and there's a specific way that you can wean off of food, like by doing it like casino-like fashion, where sometimes you give your dog 1, 2, or 3 pieces of kibble, so sometimes none. Sometimes you just praise your dog, and there's a certain way that we can wean off of food. But I find that the weaning off process of a guidance-based tool, the leash, is a little bit easier than, again, food, which is a reward. They're two different. Yeah, you can use a food, and this is getting a little off topic and a little deep, but if you're a trainer or if you kind of like geek out on this stuff, now the food is typically a reward, but it can also be used as like a guidance tool. right? So depending on which lens you look at it through and in what scenario, a lot of times it can be both. The leash is cleaner, and there's not as much dependency on it. So that's number 5. Number 6, no incorporating of the look command. If your dog isn't looking at you, he's looking at something else besides you. What is that something else? Is it a squirrel, or is it, the food in your hand? So if we can have your dog understand the concept of looking at your face versus looking at the reward or looking at the distraction, you're halfway there, if not further. That I firmly believe that great sit stays, just a dog's general responsiveness, whether you're doing something like a sit stay that's more sedentary or something that requires a certain level of snappiness to be a clean response, him or her looking at you is imperative. Same with humans. If you're not looking at me, a lot of times with my staff, my kids, even with my clients sometimes, like I'll just stop talking. And then once they look at me again, I start talking again. And yeah, that's pretty direct when it's human to human communication, but I think it drives the point home relatively quickly. The cool thing with dogs is it doesn't matter. You can do that with dogs and you don't come off as a pompous or jerky or whatever the case might be. But if you're not making eye contact, you don't have a dog's focus. And so I always think, what is my dog looking at and how can I have my dog look at me? What is my dog gravitating towards and how can I have my dog gravitate towards me? And so what we do in my system is we teach just a little glance by itself, like where we just let your dog smell the food. Then from there, we say look, which is the verbal, then boom, our hand pops up to the side. And so we're kind of standing with one arm out, almost like a scarecrow. The second your dog looks at you, you say, yes, boom. And then the hand comes down. So then the verbal, then the actual body language of your hand coming down. Because all those little things are tells to your dog. Those are more important in your communication than what you might give all these little things credit for. So that's why we break it down. After we get that little glance, we can then use your verbal to claim when he's looking at you and draw that little 1 second glance out into a 2 second, a little baby stare. Then from there, we up the ante a little bit more. And then from there, we stop putting our hand up, where we just say the verbal look. And then we just claim by saying good, that your dog looking at you. Then we start to add motion to that, where we move around. And then once your dog starts to kind of get it for the look command, and we start to like add a couple different like decoys and things to kind of mess your dog up on purpose in a strategic way to grow your dog incrementally. From there, as you've been working on stays and all these other categories, we just start to, what I call, have puppy inflation, where we up the ante. So now stays are sit, stay, and stare. We make that a new requirement. The two biggest things in my system, in regards to obedience at least, are coming when called, having a dog, come when called formally, but also naturally gravitate back towards you when it has the ability to otherwise not, when it has a little bit of freedom, and sit, stay, stare. I found that those are the two biggest things. And so, yeah, there's only two things. There's not like a million commands, like the leave it, the drop it, the this command, the that command. It's two main things that I seek, but we get really nuanced with it. So, and that's kind of where the beauty is. That's where the overwhelming feeling is. That's where the overwhelm is initially for my clients, but that's also where the beauty's at. That's where the responsiveness is at, and what it is that you said to me that you truly want. And if you don't want a dog with manners and who's well socialized and behaved and responsive, then you're probably on the wrong podcast. Anyway, number 7. The reason why clients get stuck bribing their dogs with food is a lack of understanding of the 3 Ds. The 3 Ds consist of distance, distraction, and duration. So, let's say you train your dog in the house, right? That's a distraction level 1. Maybe all of a sudden your other dog runs by or your kid runs by, and then all of a sudden you have to compete for your dog's attention, and then it goes up to like a distraction level 4, right? So that's like distraction. Distance might be how close does your dog have to be to respond, or like how close do you have to be to your dog? So let's say you tell your dog to do something, but you're not standing over top of it. Let's say you might be seated from 10 feet away. Is your dog still going to respond? On the flip side, again, like how far away is your dog? Is your dog, football field away? And if you call it, all bets are off, but your dog will come and called, 20 feet away. That just gives you an idea of like distance, right? So talk about distraction, distance, and duration. How long can your dog maintain that stare? I just talked about that a second ago. How long can your dog maintain that sit stay? Let's say you don't understand these concepts, and I just gave you a quick crash course, like the 2-minute version of the 3Ds. We'll go into it in depth in coming podcasts. Another reason to subscribe. But a lack of understanding of those, and then the rewarding process that goes along with that. So initially, you're going to give your dog a decent amount of feedback by saying yes, which is like the reward marker, and then producing that food. Sometimes 1, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 pieces of kibble. Every once in a while, you'll do none and just do praise, even right off the bat. But let's say you've been working with your dog for a couple days, maybe a week, and then you start to like go outside. And things are going pretty well. Like you're increasing the amount of feedback that you're giving your dog, just like you did like that first day when you were like constantly having to reinforce what you wanted your dog to do. And so you're looking at all these little points to say, boom, that right there is what I wanted. Yup, that too. I don't want that. Boom, that right there. Now we're on the right track. It's basically what you're telling your dog as you're rewarding your dog in a specific way. So I'm not going into those specifics now. That's a different day, different podcast. It's almost like, if you remember the movie Austin Powers, and like when he was the photographer and he's taking pictures of the fembots, and he's just saying like, yeah, baby, like, and he's just as a photographer, he's saying like hold that pose, like, that's what I want. And that's basically what you're doing for your dog. As you're walking them through these points. The difference is there's set, very specific, like little milestones that we're like, boom, that right there. Yup, this right here is getting you hooked up. Boom, that right there, that was it. Like it's a lot more specific. So you're hitting those points inside in regards to the food rewarding process. And then all of a sudden, you don't have to give as much feedback. So you're not rewarding as frequently. Then you go outside, your dog's doing pretty good. You're probably rewarding more frequently because that's what you have to do to keep your dog's attention. And then all of a sudden the bus goes by. Like that, you hear that diesel engine like coming from like around the corner. So what you're going to do is just in a like hypersensitive way, do your best to keep your dog's attention by having that reward process be much more frequently. Even if it's just like to keep your dog's attention for like 10 seconds as that bus goes past. And what you might be able to do is when the next car goes past, it doesn't have as much of a sound to it. Like it's a lower distraction, especially since you just conquered the bus, right? So if that bus was like a level 7 distraction and that car is normally a level 5 distraction, that car might now be a number 4 distraction because now that you have some momentum in your training session, you just decreased that car's distraction level. And that's essentially what we're doing with training, is we're just making what in your dog's world, these otherwise small things that your dog turns into a big deal. We're making these big deal things small, like they should be, where your dog doesn't give a crap. You want your dog to not care about stuff. So in order to have your dog not care about stuff, he needs to care about you. The only way that's going to happen is if you care about him. How you're going to do that? You're going to learn about him. You're going to apply. You're going to grow yourself, because without growing yourself, you cannot grow your dog. So, once you understand the 3Ds, you can then manipulate the reward process with your dog's environment, whether it's just a general environment or a situational distraction. So the environment itself just might be, the sticks, leaves, sounds, like the neighbors like unlocking their car door from a couple houses over. a dog barking from a couple houses over. That's all environmental stuff. Then there's situational distractions where, again, that bus goes by, that neighbor walks his dog by, and then all of a sudden you rapidly shift gears and you go and to change your actual frequency of the reward, as well as adapting the other all the modalities of communication. You're going to use your leash a little bit differently in those scenarios. Maybe you might use more body language. You might use more verbal feedback than you otherwise were just using a second ago before that bus comes from around the corner. And these are all things that I will teach you to adapt on the fly and just think about. And then eventually you won't think about it. You'll just do it, just like driving a car. All right, onward and upward. Number 8. Going along with the lack of understanding of the 3Ds is the lack of assignment of numeric values and quantifying both your dog's state and those 3Ds. And that analogy I just gave you, I assign numbers. Why? Because it makes it easier to adapt and grow. Without being able to quantify, you can't manage. Let me say that again. Without being able to quantify, you can't manage. You're just shooting in the dark. I need specific benchmarks in order to have a real conversation with anybody. And that goes for a dog. If we can't categorize, if we can't place that numeric value as to where your dog's at in his training, then you're going to be constantly, like sloppily, muddling through your sessions, and you're going to get disenfranchised. I don't mind not being able to purchase something because I know I don't have the money. So what do I have to do? I don't get upset. I'm not saying, oh, I really want that thing, and I'm just never going to have it. No, I'm just going to make more credits. I'm going to work a little bit more. I'm going to do what I got to do to get more money in the bank, and then I can make a debit, right? And so if you look at these different like numeric values, it's just saying, okay, I know currently in my training, my dog is trained at this point. He will not show well if a situation like, this point at this numeric value within the 3D chart comes up, he's going to perform like crap, but he's going to do better. He's not going to perform. Let me put it like this. He's not going to perform like crap. He's going to perform a lot better, and you're going to see nodes of your training kick through. And you're going to do some more flow-based training instead of a more stringent, like just, expecting for your dog to let things go and expect for him to remain like kind of like a rock solid sit stay. You're going to go back to going to flow mode where that motion is lotion sort of technique, where you just look to naturally through like different like calming skills, have your dog not focus so intensely. But you're not going to try to tap into that muscle memory because you haven't made enough credits yet. And that's where you go back to the lab. We're just like Eminem when he screwed up his battle raps, you kind of go back to the lab and you just keep working those 3Ds, working your dog's responsiveness. And next time you step up to that same thing, that same scenario where your dog failed, he might still not perform perfectly, but you should see that he performs better and that you're more confident. And that's where the growth is happening, people. So don't worry if your dog doesn't always perform or isn't like staying in this great sit stay or is mannerly, but you need to see nodes of growth and know that your dog needs to perform at that point sometime soon. So it's not a pass for crappy training. It's not an excuse, or it's not an enabler, but it is a good way to hopefully keep you motivated and look at the bigger picture and, again, have you go back to the drawing board and know how to get at it. So number 8, just to reiterate, is assigning numeric values to 3Ds and your dog's state. Now, your dog's state can be its motivation level. Maybe your dog's not hungry. So you went from getting some level of responsiveness in the house, and then you bring your dog outside, and then he's not interested in eating. Okay, then you're not going to eat. You're going to miss a meal. It's not the end of the world. I mean, if you got a dog from like a cruelty case, you got your dog out of a dumpster, and it's severely emaciated, which I can say that because I've gotten dogs out of the dumpster, so I'm not just, pulling this out of, out of the air, then yeah, you're gonna have a little bit of a different setup. But if you're listening to this, I'm assuming that you have a younger puppy that you recently got in your home and all is normal. So just like I have that food motivation schedule for in the house initially, if you bring your dog outside and it doesn't want to eat, that's okay. Your dog made a decision that it wasn't hungry in that situation. So you're going to try again next meal and you'd be surprised. Your dog will probably eat, or maybe your dog will eat half of its food and then all of a sudden start going wayward on you and not focusing. And you're going to know you just hit that point on that scale where you're outside at a distraction level 5. Initially, your dog was hungry at a level 7, so you had its attention. Then all of a sudden, your dog gets a little bit of grub in its belly, and then it brings it down to about a 5. Now you're right at that cusp of kind of having attention and having your dog go wayward on you. Then all of a sudden, you keep giving it the college try. You're starting to get frustrated, and your dog starts to not care as much about food. So now food is at a level 4, and the environment, the distraction level is at a level 5. Boom, hang up the leash and put the food bowl up as well, and come back out and try it again next meal, next training session. So that's what I mean by motivation and putting numeric values to things, because then you're not going to get all upset at your dog where it's like, I knew you can do this. You do it inside. Why can't you do it outside? Well, that's the reason why. And that's how it will always be. And so don't get upset at your dog. Listen to this podcast and apply it. The other thing to consider is, does your dog really comprehend this? Is it instilled like in your dog's muscle memory to do this? Because I need your dog really firing on all cylinders once you bring your dog outside. So, number 9. All right, people, I need you to stay focused. We're almost through this. All right, slap yourself in the face. Drink that cup of coffee. Take that deep breath in through your nose. I got a cold. Out through the mouth. All right, number 9. Both hands aren't being utilized effectively. Namely, your hand is tied up on a clicker, or even worse, in your pocket, or your hand's holding a piece of food. So, I like clicker training. I'm not against it. I'm for whatever works as long as it's, like humane or whatever. And you're not being a jerk to your dog, basically. I find that with only having 2 hands, I want to make the absolute best use of them, as I do everything, as you know, in my system. I'm a maximizer. So to get the maximum use out of my hands, I find that they can be better used on a tug toy or on a leash. And you can do both, right? So what I find, like with holding the clicker, the dexterity that your fingers need to actually like hold that clicker. And I know there's different kind of clickers now that like you can be a little bit more agile with them, but I would rather use my limited hand space to flow with that leash or give that boom, like right on time, like leash communication, to have those quick little inroads to get a dog's focus, get them back on my radar. And then once I actually get that dog's focus with that little leash communication, I immediately do something like verbal or body language to finish that process. Again, I'm getting ahead here. That will be in other podcasts. But no, you want your hands to be freed up. Tug toys you can hold a tug toy in your hand and a leash. Even when doing the food bowl drill, I teach my clients right off the bat how you can hold the food bowl and still hold that leash effectively. So even the drills that we're using food in, because there are 3 that we actually show the dog food in my system. Those drills are the look command initially for the rollout, sit, stay at the food bowl, obviously. And the third is food throw, where we throw the food and we expect the dog to sit, stay, and stare to get the food thrown and to be released to go and get the food, because that carries over very well to training through play. But even with that, when we have food in our hands, it's done in a strategic way that isn't sloppy. Again, I'm telling you, like on number too about like, having the food in your hand or having your hand in your pocket. There's going to be times where you're going to have food in your hands, but it's context, people. It's got to be done correctly, so that way your dog sees it as just like that is like small potatoes, doesn't get hung up on it. It's like almost transactional in the rest of that process where it's not the end all be all. So we're gonna like skate through using food when we're doing these things, or we're gonna use it as a specific decoy. But again, the intentionality behind it is very high versus the sloppy food-based training where the food's just, out there always. So anyway, your hands need to be freed up to flow with that leash and give, boom, right on time communication with that leash is necessary. And if your hands are constantly having food in it or on a clicker or in your pocket or something like that, then you're not making the use of your hands. And that's one of two things that sets you apart from your dog. One is your brain capacity, and that's your dog has a mental capacity of approximately a 2-year-old. So if you're working with me, you and I can't overcome a 2-year-old, we got problems. And then the second thing is those opposable digits, right? Those wiggly fingers you have. Your dog is nipping because the same reason the toddler is exploring the world with its hands and putting everything like in its mouth and just doing, again, just touching stuff all day long. That's the same thing that your puppy is doing essentially. It just doesn't have hands, so its teeth are its hands, its mouth are its hands. But you have hands, people, so let's use them. Last is more of a psychological reason why your dog is dependent on food. It's because you're dependent on food. Yes, sometimes it's because of a lack of discipline where it's just your dog is more responsive. So you just don't go outside because it's cold or it's hot outside, and you train where it's comfortable. But yeah, you want your dog to respond, in all those scenarios where you don't train. Like I mentioned, it can be because you get like these quick little hits of feeling good when your dog sits because you're showing it the food, and it sits quicker when the food is present, and it doesn't sit as quick or at all sometimes when the food's not there. And so, yeah, part of your dependency on it might be because of a lack of discipline, but I firmly believe that most people want it, right? Like most people are willing to be disciplined if I can just show you the results. If I can basically show you how to get the results for yourself, but you can taste them. And you have a system where you can learn to be not dependent. So that's where I come in. With that said, I'm going to review with you the 10 reasons why you might be dependent on training with food and basically a vending machine to your puppy. Starting with number 1, you're sloppy from the start, or you're just generally have sloppy communication skills. Number 2, your hands are constantly having food in it, or they're living in your pockets. You're calling your dog over to you and your hands are in your pocket the whole time your dog is looking at your hand in your pocket. Number 3, you're starting with high value treats. Number 4, you have no exit strategy. You're starting with, you might not even know step 2, your next step, and you definitely don't have an overall exit strategy. Number 5, the lack of use, and probably paired with that, the lack of understanding of how to use the leash. The leash is going to help your dog come to you in between every single rep of doing food-based training, where eventually just gets in the habit and you don't need the leash. So the leash can be a good inroad to doing that, and then from there, body language and verbal help see that process through, where your dog comes to you out after every single rep, and just gets used to coming to you. And just how I want that leash and in general to incorporate that leaning in toward response from your dog, you need to have your dog constantly not just coming to you, but looking at you. So that's number 6. Number 7, the lack of understanding of the 3 Ds, distance, distraction, and duration. Number 8, the lack of assigning numeric values to your dog's state as well as the environment. So you can really understand like what your game plan is going to be, how are you going to respond in that instant, and know kind of when you got to go back to the lab and how to tighten up and so you can continue to scale. Number 9, your hands aren't being used effectively. You only have 2 hands. Use them effectively. You'll see with my clients, a lot of times we do hand over hand as we're reeling a dog in as they're coming over to us. So that way, if a dog stops, we can literally just put our thumbs down and have right on time communication. And there's a certain spot where I want your hands to be. There's a certain spot where I want your elbows to be as you use this leash to help flow with your dog and to have these little inroads, these little communication inroads to get your dog's focus back on you. Number 10, you're dependent on it. Maybe you lack the discipline, but I don't think that's the truth. I think you had the discipline, but you don't know what to do. That note, if you do want to sign up for some of my, like whether it's a free webinar, you want to sign up for my course, you want to check out some of my videos on my Facebook page, I'm going to put the link in the show notes. And from there, let me help you. I'll take it as far as I can, and you can do a lot with my free content, but we can do a lot more if we can work intimately together. I can get you in a classroom, albeit a digital classroom, if I can put you around other puppy owners who might ask a question in a way where it's enlightening for you. Just remember, when I make these podcasts, I just have things come up that I want to talk about. I want to go on a rant about. I want to help increase your ability to think about your approach with your dog, but it's not done in a systematic way. So I have, again, a topic that I want to kind of like go down a rabbit hole, and I go nuts with it. What's nice about when we work together in my system is that we lay out the groundwork, and again, we do what the overall goal is, what the week by week goal is, so you know exactly what milestone you have to be at. I go over your daily regimen, and then we change the lens on that microscope and focus a little bit more on specific topics, where we do 2 or 3 live webinars each week. And so there are specific takeaways for what you need to do at this next step. So everything builds off each other in a nice methodical way versus consuming some of this content on the social media sites, like, you know, podcasts and, you know, videos and things like that, where you're getting these one-off pieces of information. It's very useful, and if you can glue it together on your own, by all means, you know, you'll be able to get a lot of value from it. But I firmly believe in starting from the start and building things incrementally in a way that makes sense, and that's a little bit more personalized versus learning this way. But with that said, at the very least, subscribe to this podcast, and remember, get at it. Be active. Get to your puppy before your puppy gets to you. Drive that process, and I'll be anxiously looking forward to seeing you next week. Remember, champion puppy owners, action over anxiety, discipline equals freedom. Take the next step and do what you know how to do. Drive the puppy training process. Truly commit yourself to this. Hit it hard for a short period of time so you can stop working on your dog and simply enjoy them. I'll see you next time. Peace!